So to continue my series about the world's unobtainable wines, I wanted to talk a bit today about Domaine Bizot. I've opened a 2018 Von Romane Le Jachet. It's the first 2018 Bizot I've tasted, I think, unless I tasted one at La Pelée last week and forgot about it in the melee. Now Bizot is a producer that's really become absolutely cultish in the last few years, particularly. I mean, he's been making wine since the 1990s, but it really took off in the last decade, and especially the last 4 or 5 years, I think. Very interesting guy. I mean, a very uncompromising personality. I've tasted with him once. He has a rather ambivalent relationship with the wine press, which I entirely understand, so it's not a regular occurrence for me. And his policy is, extremely low yields. Everything is sort of done almost in a rather 19th century way. The vines are trained to the stakes that, if in the Northern Rhone, they'd be called échelons, and it's a more common name, but in Burgundy they're technically called Pézot. Yields are extremely limited as a result of the sort of gobelet pruning that he does, and you have tiny clusters. And his sort of economic model, that works. It's something that not many people could permit themselves to do. He's really sort of gone back to basics of winemaking, as he sees it, from a very sort of philosophical perspective, going back to first principles, saying, as he put it to me, what is the essential tool with which to make wine? Well, it's a fermentation tank. A lot of people, he said, from enology school that he met when he was teaching at enology school in Dijon, would respond sulfur, not a fermentation tank. So, he doesn't use sulfur during the vinification. A lot of whole bunch from these very, very, very low yields, and then 100% new oak, Tanillery Rousseau, I believe. And all the wines are bottled directly from the barrel with the Chèvre du Bec, the sort of 19th century way. So in some ways they're quite modern, and the whole no sulfur thing today is obviously very fashionable. But in many ways they look back to the wines of the 19th century. Jachet is actually my favorite wine from him. He makes, quite a range. I think everyone sort of chases after the Bizot often because it's a Grand Cru, but the Jachet is just a village level of Von Romane, absolutely fabulous. I mean, a very strikingly perfumed, spicy, exotic, sort of carnal wine at its best. How do we explain the sort of, the cult craze around Bizot lately? I think, the quality of the wines is there, especially in the last few years. They've been also much more perhaps consistent than they were historically. I think also it's interesting just to look at the market phenomenon, because you see these sort of wines going for 5, 6, 7,000 a bottle. What's going on? I think there's a whole generation of new consumers, mainly in mainland China, who learned about Burgundy through, essentially through the wines of DRC and Loire, and for whom that sort of very unique set of flavors, in fact, even within Burgundy, it's a very unique set of flavors to do with a certain amount of stem retention, certain kinds of fermentation kinetics, and then particular choices of new wood and élevage. You can't get that many places. And, I'm not saying that Bizot is reminiscent particularly of DRC or Loire. It's its own style, absolutely. I mean, it's one of the most singular individual styles in Burgundy, for that matter. But I think it does give you some of that sort of hit of those sort of very exotic, spicy, floral flavors that you can't really get very often anywhere in the wine world, and even within Burgundy. How is 18 for Bizot? This is the first time I'm tasting it. Yeah, you don't really feel the heat of the vintage at all, frankly. I mean, it's 12.5 on the label, and it tastes barely 12.5. The French would say digestible, bright flavors, perfumed, a bit more tightly wound. I mean, it doesn't have the same sort of out of the gates demonstrative charm of the 11. Not the 11, rather the 17. 17 Jachet is maybe my favorite all-time Bizot of my experience. But yeah, that sort of very subtle amalgam between the sort of floral notes and the spicy notes of the stems with the similar characteristics coming from the barrels makes for really a very compelling thing. And it's every bottle I open, it was harder and harder to imagine replacing it at the state of the market today. But there are interesting wines, and I think anyone who has the opportunity to taste them, and sometimes you can in restaurants in Burgundy at least for a reasonable price, should do so, because it's one of the most singular styles in contemporary Burgundy.